It started with a question I never saw coming. We were sitting in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound as my wife poured herself a glass of wine. She leaned on the counter, her eyes avoiding mine. "Have you ever thought about open relationships?" she asked, her tone almost casual, like she was testing the waters. I blinked, unsure if I had heard her right. "Open relationships?" I repeated, my voice heavy with disbelief. She nodded, swirling her wine. "You know, couples who love each other but explore things with other people. It's becoming more common." My stomach turned. The thought of someone else touching her, of her wanting to be with someone else, made me sick. "No," I said flatly, "and I don't think I ever could." She sighed, looking almost disappointed. "I just thought, maybe it could bring us closer. Some people say it helps their marriage." "It wouldn't help ours," I said firmly, standing to clear my plate. "The idea of another man touching you? No, that's not something I can do." The conversation ended there, or so I thought. She dropped the subject, and for the next few weeks, life seemed normal. But looking back, I see now that the seed had been planted, and it was only a matter of time before it sprouted into something that would destroy everything. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when the truth came knocking, literally. My wife had gone to the store, leaving me alone with my laptop and a cup of coffee. The sound of the doorbell pulled me away from an article I'd been reading, and I frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my best friend Michael stood there. We hadn't seen each other in weeks, maybe longer. He told me he was busy with a new relationship, and I'd been swamped with work. But something about the way he looked, pale, nervous, like he was on the verge of breaking, set me on edge. "Hey man," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "You okay?" He shook his head, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm not okay." "What's going on?" I asked, closing the door behind him. He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging under the weight of whatever he was about to say. "I need to tell you something," he said, his words coming out in a rush. "I can't keep it a secret anymore. It's killing me." My chest tightened. "What is it?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room like he couldn't bear to look at me. "I've been seeing someone," he said finally, "and it's your wife." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "What the hell are you talking about?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I wanted an answer. "She wanted an open relationship," he said, his voice trembling. "But it wasn't really about being open. It was about being with me. She's been seeing me for months, and I can't do it anymore. I can't keep lying to you." I stared at him, the room spinning around me. "Months?" I managed to choke out. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen," she said. She said she didn't know how to tell you. The rage that erupted in me was volcanic. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep myself from punching him right there in my own living room. "Get out," I said through gritted teeth. "Please, just get out," I yelled, my voice echoing off the walls. Michael backed away, his hands up in surrender. "I'm sorry," he said again before slipping out the door. When my wife returned home later that day, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the rage still burning inside me. She walked in with a bag of groceries, her smile faltering when she saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting the bag down. I didn't say anything at first, just stared at her until the silence became unbearable. "Did you forget something at the store?" I finally asked, my voice icy. She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Michael was here," I said, standing up. "He told me everything." Her face went white, the blood draining from her cheeks. "I can explain," she began, her voice shaking. "Don't bother," I snapped. "Pack your things. You can go live with him. I don't want to see you again. Please, just let me." "No," I yelled, slamming my hand on the table. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to make excuses. You wanted him? You got him. Now get out of my house." She stared at me, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't care. My world had already been shattered. There was nothing she could say to fix it. That night, I sat alone in the dark, the silence of the house oppressive. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. My wife and my best friend, the two people I trusted most in the world, had stabbed me in the back, and I was left to pick up the pieces. The days after my wife moved out were a blur of anger and disbelief. The silence in the house was deafening, a constant reminder of the life that had crumbled around me. Every corner seemed to echo with memories of her, laughing in the kitchen, curled up on the couch, her clothes still hanging in the closet. I tried to distract myself with work, but even there, the betrayal followed me. Diane, my mother-in-law and coworker, noticed almost immediately that something was wrong. She cornered me in the break room one afternoon, her brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. I hesitated, unsure if I should say anything, but the anger bubbling inside me was too much to hold back. "Your daughter," I said, my voice dripping with bitterness. "She's been having an affair. With Michael." Diane's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in shock. "What?" "Yeah," I said, letting out a humorless laugh. "Turns out, she wanted an open relationship so she could be with my best friend. And now she's moved in with him." She stared at me, her expression shifting from shock to anger. "I can't believe this," she said, shaking her head. "She told me everything was fine between you two. She said you were happy." "So did I said bitterly. "But I guess we were both wrong." Over the next few weeks, Diane became my unexpected ally. She stopped talking to her daughter altogether, furious at the way she had betrayed me. "I didn't raise her to do this," Diane said one day as we worked late. "I don't know what's gotten into her, but this isn't the woman I thought I knew." Her support was a lifeline. She was the only person who seemed to truly understand what I was going through, and I found myself leaning on her more and more. But the pain of the betrayal didn't go away. It sat heavy in my chest, a constant ache that no amount of work or distraction could dull. The company's holiday party was supposed to be a chance to unwind, but I wasn't in the mood for celebration. Diane convinced me to go, insisting that I needed to get out of the house and try to enjoy myself. "You can't let them ruin your life," she said firmly. "You deserve better than that." So I went, though my heart wasn't in it. The party was loud and crowded, filled with people laughing and drinking, but all I could think about was her. Everywhere I looked, I saw couples dancing, holding hands, whispering to each other. It was like a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. By the time Diane found me, I was nursing my third drink, my head swimming with alcohol and bitterness. "You look terrible," she said, sitting down beside me. "Thanks," I muttered, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding me. "Let's get out of here," she said. "You don't need this." We ended up at a quiet bar a few blocks away, the noise of the party fading into the background. Diane sat across from me, her expression soft but concerned. "You need to stop blaming yourself," she said gently. "None of this is your fault." "Maybe," I said, staring down at my drink, "but that doesn't make it hurt any less." She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "I know," she said, "and I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of this." Something about the way she looked at me, her eyes filled with genuine empathy, made my chest tighten. Without thinking, I leaned forward and kissed her. It was impulsive, fueled by alcohol and pain, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she kissed me back, her hand cupping my face as the world around us seemed to fade away. The drive to her house was a blur, the heat between us simmering just beneath the surface. When we finally crossed the threshold of her door, it boiled over, and we tumbled into her bedroom, our hands exploring, our mouths desperate and searching. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was revenge. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a tangled mess of emotions. Diane lay beside me, her hair spread across the pillow, her breathing soft and steady. For a moment, I wondered if I should feel guilty, but I didn't. She stirred, opening her eyes and giving me a small, tentative smile. "Morning," she said quietly. "Morning," I replied, unsure of what else to say. She sat up, pulling the sheets around her. "Do you regret it?" I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. "No," I said honestly. "Do you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. No. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of what we had done hanging heavy in the air. Finally, she spoke. We can't let her win, she said. We can't let her take everything from us. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what winning even looked like anymore. All I knew was that for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely powerless. The days after that night with Diane were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I couldn't shake the memory of her touch, the way she looked at me as if I wasn't completely broken. It was the first time since everything fell apart that I felt like I had some control, some power. But there was no escaping the mess we'd created. Diane, ever the pragmatic one, insisted that her daughter, my ex-wife, needed to know what had happened. She deserves to hear it from me, Diane said. I wasn't so sure. Why tell her at all? I asked. She doesn't deserve the satisfaction. She'll find out eventually, Diane replied. And when she does, I'd rather it come from me than through some rumor. I didn't argue. Diane wasn't the kind of woman to back down when she made up her mind. When my ex-wife called me later that week, I knew Diane had told her. The fury in her voice was unmistakable. How could you do this to me? She screamed. You slept with my mother? You're disgusting. The irony of her outrage wasn't lost on me. You're mad at me? I said, laughing bitterly. That's rich, coming from the woman who cheated on me with my best friend. That's different, she snapped. How? I shot back. You wanted open relationships, didn't you? Well, consider this my version of open. You get Michael, and I get Diane. Fair trade. Her silence was deafening. For the first time since this nightmare began, she had nothing to say. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My ex-wife cut ties with Diane completely, refusing to speak to her or acknowledge her existence. Diane told me about the confrontation later, her voice tinged with both anger and sadness. She called me every name in the book, Diane said, shaking her head. Said I betrayed her, that I ruined her life. And what did you say? I asked. I told her the truth, Diane replied, that she brought this on herself, that if she hadn't betrayed you, none of this would have happened. Hearing that brought me a twisted sense of satisfaction. My ex-wife had built her life on lies and deceit, and now, for the first time, she was facing the consequences of her actions. But satisfaction didn't equate to peace. The more I thought about what had happened with Diane, the more I questioned whether it had been worth it. Sure, it felt good to see my ex-wife squirm, but the bitterness lingering in my chest hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown. Diane seemed to sense my turmoil. One evening, as we sat in her living room, she turned to me with a serious expression. Do you regret it? She asked, her voice soft but steady. I hesitated, staring into my glass of whiskey. No, I said finally, but I don't know if it helped. She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. Revenge is like that. It feels good in the moment, but it doesn't fix anything. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so consumed by anger, so focused on making my ex-wife pay, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I really wanted. One night, Michael showed up at my door. I wasn't expecting him, and the sight of him standing on my porch, looking sheepish and pathetic, filled me with rage. What the hell do you want? I demanded, crossing my arms. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. I came to apologize, he said. I laughed bitterly. You think an apology is going to fix this? You think saying sorry is going to undo everything you and she did? No, he admitted. But I needed to say it anyway. Great, I said, stepping back and motioning to the street. You said it. Now get the hell off my property. Come on, man, he pleaded. I screwed up, okay? I know that. But I miss our friendship. You miss being able to look at yourself in the mirror without feeling like a piece of garbage, I interrupted. That's not my problem, Michael. You destroyed our friendship, and you don't get to walk back into my life like nothing happened. He opened his mouth to respond, but I slammed the door in his face. The confrontation with Michael brought everything into sharp focus. My ex-wife had betrayed me. Michael had betrayed me, and no amount of revenge or apologies would change that. The only thing I could control now was how I moved forward. I wasn't ready to forgive them, Not yet, and maybe not ever. But I was ready to let go of the anger that had been consuming me. As for Diane, we agreed to take a step back. What we had shared was born out of pain and anger, not love, and we both knew that continuing down that path would only make things more complicated. "You've been my rock through all of this," I told her one night as we said goodbye. "I don't know what I would have done without you." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're going to be okay," she said. "You're stronger than you think." In the weeks that followed, I started focusing on myself, on rebuilding the pieces of my life that had been shattered. I joined a gym, picked up some new hobbies, and reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage. The pain of the betrayal didn't disappear overnight, but slowly it began to fade. The weeks turned into months, and the anger that had consumed me for so long began to give way to something else: resignation. I wasn't fully healed, not yet, but the sharp edges of the betrayal had dulled, leaving behind a quiet ache that was easier to manage. I focused on rebuilding my life, one piece at a time. My home, once filled with memories of her, was slowly transformed. I replaced the furniture we'd chosen together, painted the walls a different color, and cleared out anything that reminded me of her. It was cathartic, like shedding an old skin. Diane and I kept in touch, though we both knew things could never go back to the way they were. Our connection had been forged in pain and revenge, and while it brought us solace in the moment, it wasn't something either of us wanted to build a future on. One afternoon, as I was rearranging the living room, Diane called. Her voice was quieter than usual, tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Hi," she began, hesitant. "I just wanted to check on you." "I'm doing okay," I replied, and for the first time, I meant it. "How about you?" There was a pause before she answered. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. About us." I sat down, sensing where the conversation was headed. And I think it's time we both move on," she said, her voice steady but sad. "What we had, it helped me, and I hope it helped you too. But it wasn't meant to last." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "You're right. We needed each other then. But now it's time to figure things out on our own." "Exactly," she said softly. "You're stronger than you think, you know. You'll get through this." "So will you," I replied. We said our goodbyes, and when I hung up, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Diane had been my anchor during the worst storm of my life, but now it was time to set sail on my own. My ex-wife, on the other hand, couldn't seem to let go. She texted me sporadically, always with some excuse to reach out. Sometimes it was about a forgotten piece of mail or a question about a bill. Other times, it was an apology thinly veiled as an attempt to rekindle some semblance of a connection. One evening, she called me out of the blue. "Hey," she said, her voice tentative. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she began. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "You're right. You don't deserve my forgiveness. But I'm not angry anymore. I've moved on." Her silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I'm glad you've moved on," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope you find someone who makes you happy." "I already have," I replied. "Myself." She hung up without another word, and I realized that was the closure I'd been searching for. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my newfound independence. I took up woodworking, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. The act of creating something with my hands, of shaping raw wood into something beautiful, was deeply satisfying. I started traveling, too, short trips at first, then longer ones. I went to places my ex-wife and I had talked about visiting but never did. Standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, staring out at the endless expanse of red and orange cliffs, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. One night, as I sat on my porch, a beer in hand, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. The betrayal, the anger, the revenge. It had all been a part of my story, but it didn't define me anymore. I had lost my wife, my best friend, and the life I thought I wanted. But in losing all of that, I had found something far more valuable: myself. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all.